welcome to today's Take 5. Today we are going to be starting a new book in our Bible, and that's 1 Corinthians. So if you haven't been joining the Take 5s or reading along, now is a really good place to start, and I encourage you to do so. So today we're going to be starting in 1 Corinthians, and to kind of give you a little bit of an overview before we continue on, the letter of 1 Corinthians was a letter written by Paul to the church of Corinth. Now, Corinth was a very well-known philosophical city, and the church itself didn't used to be like this, but it became to be known as a congregation made up of different schools of thought. So you would have one church that was divided, and basically it was divided by who these people were following. So it was no longer we're following Jesus, it was, oh, we're following Paul, or we're following this because we believe what he has to say is correct. And it was more known as philosophical thought, very divided, instead of being unified and united all under the gospel. And this looks very similar to the church of today. And so before we get on with our actual Take 5, I want to play the short little clip of just an overview to help you understand the context of 1 Corinthians.
Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, written to a church community that Paul knew really well. Corinth was a major port city in the ancient world and had lots of temples to Greek and Roman gods. It was a big economic center, and so Paul strategically came here as a missionary. He spent a year and a half there getting to know people, talking to them about Jesus, and a whole bunch of people became followers of Jesus and formed a church community. You can read about all of this in Acts chapter 18. So after a while, Paul moved on to start churches in other cities, and he started getting reports that things were not going well at all back at the church in Corinth. It was plagued by all kinds of problems, and that's why he wrote this letter. It's broken up into 5 main parts, along with a final greeting. And these 5 sections correspond to 5 main problems that Paul is addressing. And so the letter reads like a collection of short essays on different topics, but there are these core ideas that unite all of the pieces together. So here's what he does in each section. He describes the problem, but then he always responds to that problem with some part of the story of the gospel, which is the good news about Jesus. And he shows how they're actually not living out what they say they believe. And so this letter is all about learning to think about every area of life through the lens of the gospel. So let's dive in and see how he does it. In chapters 1 through 4, the problem is that there are these divisions in the church. There are some other teachers who had come through town since Paul left, a guy named Apollos and then Peter, and people had picked their favorite teacher and then became groupies around that leader and then started to talk bad and disrespect people who favored another leader or teacher. And so Paul, his response to this is kind of sarcastic and sharp. He says, you have to be kidding me, right? The church is not a popularity contest. The church is a community of people who are centered around Jesus. Its leaders and its teachers are simply servants of Jesus. So while you might prefer one leader more than another, it's not worth dividing over and certainly not speaking poorly about each other. The center of the church is Jesus and the good news about who he is and what he's done.
Okay, so now that you have a better understanding of 1 Corinthians, we are going to start in verse 26. It says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord." So there's 3 different points that I want to point out to you guys. The first one is the gospel of God's grace leaves no room for personal boasting. So it's no longer about what we've done, what we've accomplished, because we realize how broken we truly are and how much we need God. And so we're not going to spend and waste time boasting on ourselves and our own accomplishments, because Jesus has paid it all. And because of that, we're going to boast in him and him alone. The second point is God called them not because of what they were, but in spite of what they were. So in verses 26 through 29, we see that God has called people who weren't wise, that weren't powerful, they weren't of noble birth, they weren't strong. It was things that the world would look down on and that the world wouldn't value. And God chose those people and he made them into something that they probably never, ever were going to be. And so we can see in the Bible, we see David, who was a shepherd, and he was sleeping with goats and just chilling with the livestock, and he ended up becoming a king because of God. We see prostitutes who were broken, who had and cheapened their worth, and God restored them. We see people who had stuttering impediments and other issues, and God used them for his glory alone. And so it's not because of there's nothing you can bring to the table is basically what I'm trying to say, because you can't really bring anything to the table, but God can still use you. And the last point is every believer is in Christ. Okay, so why is this important? Because it means that you as a believer have absolutely everything you need. There is no need to compete or compare yourself with others because the Lord has done it all. Christ is our wisdom. He is our righteousness. He is our sanctification and our redemption. So I want to encourage you guys today to just, one, read this chapter. Super easy step. It's really not a long chapter, and I want to encourage you guys to do a couple things, actually. First one, read the chapter. Second is I want you guys to just really soak in verses 26 through 31. And so as you go about your day, how many times are you comparing yourself? One way that we do this a lot is by scrolling through social media, and we see what other people have or what other people are like or what they look like, and we want that. And so I want you guys to be consciously aware when you're doing this, when you're going through comparing or competing with anybody. And I just really want you guys, whenever you feel yourself doing that, to immediately start praying and just turn your eyes to God, to Christ. Because I promise you, there is nothing that comparing and competing will bring you besides destruction in the end. It'll cause you to look at yourself differently. It'll cause you to undervalue yourself, and it will cause you to undervalue what God has done for you and what he can do for you. And so that's something that we need to take seriously. And the last thing is I want you guys to work on not being so prideful, which is whenever you see the word pride, it's kind of a word that we avoid and we don't think that we are. But just in your everyday, how many times are you talking about yourself versus how many times you talk about Christ? And I definitely believe that we would see a discrepancy in how we live in that way. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this Take 5, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.